Hello, chess fans. Here we are with Ryan Pickard from Newfoundland. He just returned home from the Canadian Open in Laval, Quebec, 2024, and he's going to talk to you about one of his games. So take it away, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This is my round two game against Ron Offengenden, and I had the black pieces, and I did a little bit of prep, researching his openings and stuff before the game, and I saw that he was an Italian player, so I was pretty comfortable with that. I feel pretty good in the Italian, so it started pretty standard: knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and I used to play this bishop c5 line a lot, but I find that the knight f6 stuff is just as good. It's just as solid, and I'm welcoming any fried livers that he wants to play. Of course, he didn't go for this over the board classical. Normally, you'd play something a little more mainline. So he went d3 and a bishop c5 now. So I looked in the database, and he had about an equal percentage of games played in bishop e3, short castles, and bishop g5. So I'd prepped a little bit for all of them. I had prepped the least for bishop e3, and of course, this is what he played. So I got a little bit surprised out of the opening, but it's fine. I just take, and he takes back, and then I go straight for d5. So there's one game in the Masters database that I saw played in, I think it was 2006, in this position, and Black actually won. And the structure was really interesting. It ended up almost be after takes. I think in the game, White played knight c3, and after like knight b6, bishop b3, and knight a5, the bishop's gone, and now White's light square pressure is reduced a lot. So I can play f6, bishop e6, and then after e4, I have this like Carlsbad structure on the king side that should be good for me with the light square bishop. But he played queen d2, which is actually a really interesting move. I didn't look at this move at all when I was trying to prepare for this game. And it has a really interesting purpose. It took me a little while to figure out what he was planning, but his idea is if I play knight b6, bishop b3, now there's no knight a5, right? Queen d2 stops knight a5, so I can't win the bishop right away. So we just both castle here, and I played knight b6 anyways. I think it's good to challenge the bishop here. Maybe play for a5 later, maybe just challenge the bishop immediately with bishop e6. After bishop e3, I wanted to prep for bishop e6, so queen e7, centralizing my queen, protecting my e5 pawn. And he played knight c3. I think this is the only really logical move here. I think everything else, like c3 and e4, maybe not quite fast enough. I think he needs to get these rooks connected and get the rest of his pieces out. So knight c3, bishop e6, and I don't think it matters too much, but he probably doesn't want to take here. He can, I think, and queen takes, but I think he'd rather me waste a tempo taking on b3, and then maybe having this open a file for his rook later. So e4. This is kind of the structure I was expecting. Kind of like I said, I can play f6 at any point, and I'll have this Carlsbad. But the difference is the second I play f6, he's going to snap take this bishop on e6, and my light squared bishop is going to be. Oops, let me do that. My light squared bishop is going to be gone from the position, so the light squares are going to be a whole lot weaker. So I just took first, and then I waited a little bit to play f6 before I really tried to commit to this Carlsbad structure. I mean, my plan in general is going to be to put my rooks on the center files, play f6, and put my knight on d4, and I should have a pretty solid position here. So rook d8, and I feel like I talked to a friend of mine after this game, and we kind of both agreed that White really only has one plan here, which is to play rook f2 and rook f1 and go for an attack on the king side, target down the f pawn. If you can provoke f6, then maybe you can abuse some other weaknesses on the king side there. But he played h3, and I thought this was a waiting move at first, so I just replied back with a waiting move as well. I mean, I want to play knight d4, so I want to make sure this pawn is safe. But then he played knight h2, and so I realized that the knight's coming to g4, and he wants to start an attack this way. I don't think the knight really belongs on g4. I think the knight's better on f5. So maybe something like playing for this soon. Obviously, immediately he can't play this, but maybe some queen f2, knight h4, knight f5 idea could be the right way to play this. But I think the knight it's a little slow, and once it gets to g4, it's hard to actually tell exactly what the knight's doing, right? It doesn't come to f6, it doesn't come to h6, and I can easily play f6 to keep it away from e5. So I think the knight's pretty poor here on g4. So I just dropped my knight on d4, covering some very important squares on white's side of the board. King h1, not a bad move, I don't think. I think these prophylactic king moves are very important, but I'm not really he's not at risk of anything right now, and I think he'd be much better using his time to play something like rook f2 and rook f1. Rook d6. This move is also, in retrospect, maybe a little bit questionable. I think that the idea is good. Get the rook on the sixth rank. The sixth rank is for the most part open. Maybe I can start some sort of kingside attack myself with rook g6 or rook h6. But I think at some point I want to play f6. And once this pawn is on f6, now the rook on d6 looks a little bit silly. So maybe instead of rook d6, there's a better move here. I mean, maybe I can reroute my knight back to f6. In some lines, maybe even try to get this guy all the way to f5, f4, and just sit these two knights on this really nice outpost here. But rook d6, knight e2, challenging my centerpiece here. But this move, I think it's fine. It allows for c3 soon, but c3 permanently weakens the d pawn. So I think we spoke very briefly after this game, Ron and I, and he had talked about c3 being like a possible idea at some points, but I was never really scared of this move. I always thought that, even in lines where maybe the queen comes back to d1 and guards the b3 pawn, I think that c3, it makes too many weaknesses. So I just anchored in the knight with c5. I actually am not 100% sure what I would play here. I think that I would play c takes and put my rooks on the c file to go after this. And if he ever plays anything like this, well, now I have a new weakness on d3, right? So there's always some sort of weakness, I think, in these lines. So he goes knight g3, which is what I expected after knight e2, and now maybe this knight can come to f4 or to f5. So I have to immediately to deal with some of this knight f5 stuff. I mean, I don't really want to exchange my knight in the center, but I noticed that there is a line where maybe he will play knight f5 right away, and after takes, I have this pin here. So I set up a nice trick. I think it doesn't look like much, just going after the knight on g3, but queen h4 threatens the e pawn, right? So after queen e4 or queen h4, we get knight f5, and then after knight takes, rook takes, I have queen takes e4 to win the pawn. So I can use this pin here and go up a pawn, a pretty valuable pawn as well. It was the top of his pawn chain. So now he's got this kind of underdeveloped block of pawns here, where basically whichever pawn he moves will create a weakness somewhere on the board. So I'm happy with this. He plays rook af1. Queen d5, just getting myself out of this pin. I don't want him moving his queen with tempo or anything at any point, and then having this attack on my queen open up. So queen d5, knight g4, and then just rerouting my knight over to the king side. It looks like very clearly, like for the compensation for my pawn, he's going to be attacking very quickly on the king side. So I want to make sure all of my pieces are ready to help out over here. So queen f2. Very, very clear threat. He wants to pile up on f7. In some lines, maybe even sack on h6 and try to open up. Like, for example, knight h6, if I move my king, he takes. Knight h6, if I take, there may be some lines where queen g3 is a problem. So I don't really want to deal with any of this. I just play f6 right away. And f6, I know it can be scary to move the f pawn sometimes, opening the king up like this. But in particular, this structure here is very solid if we think about where white's pieces are with respect to the center of my pawn chain. I don't think these guys are ever going to be breaking through. There's no bishops on the board, and it's very hard for this knight to find a way in. right? Like I said earlier, the knight on g4 is really not where the knight wants to be. This knight might even without the e4 pawn, might be better suited here on f5. So he plays queen h4. Again, he's moving his pieces closer, but he's not threatening a whole lot here. I'm not too worried about this. All I really want to do is make sure that I can respond to rook h5. I don't want to allow him to play rook takes h7. I also don't want to play h6 because then there's some knight takes h6 stuff. So I felt like I actually tanked a little bit here on the clock, and I felt that my best response was rook f7 and knight f8 to guard this h7 pawn. So rook f7, rook h5, knight f8, and he just plays knight e3. So my queen needs to go somewhere. I considered c6. I considered e6. I considered this as well, to try to engage in a queen trade, but I ultimately decided on queen e6. Maybe this is a fine move. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I am targeting down this pawn here, but maybe he's okay here. I'm not really 100% sure. I didn't give too much thought to it. I really just decided that I kind of wanted to keep the queens on the board here for a little bit because it gives me this rook d5, rook d4 move here that gives me a lot of initiative. So he dodges rook d4 with queen g3 and knight g6, and now this is completely blockaded. There's no way he's getting through here now with the knight on h6. He could try to come back here, but I think it's fine. I think I have rook d4. So I just kick the queen out and everything's okay. Queen f2. Again, just reshuffling his pieces, looking for a way in. Knight f4. I think this is a very good move. This completely stuffs two of his pieces, attacks the rook. It's anchored in. It's an outpost, or temporarily an outpost until he decides to play g3, which would be a very weakening move. So after knight f4, sorry, rook h4. And this was the first point in maybe the last 10 moves where I really, truly felt like there were absolutely zero threats. I didn't think that he really had much of anything going for him here. So I decided that now is a great time to play b5. I want to play b5 at some point, make sure I can challenge any c4 pushes or b4 pushes later. Also, taking the square away from some of white's pieces is really important. I want to make sure this knight doesn't come into to c4 and get too comfortable here. So b5, just controlling space, opening up the 7th rank as well in case I ever need it. Queen f3, he's eyeing this a8 square. And this is a little bit concerning, but as of right now, not too big of a deal. Rook d4. I can always meet queen a8 with rook f8. And c3. So this move, definitely a blunder. He was starting to get a bit low on the clock here. I want to say, so the time control for the Canadian Open is 90 minutes with 30-second increments. No extra time at move 40. And I want to say I was probably somewhere around half an hour on my clock at this point, and he was probably closer to 10 minutes. So he was starting to rush some decisions, I think, and this was definitely one of them. So I'm still completely confused by this move. I don't really understand what the idea is, because it's pretty clear that the d pawn needs to be defended by the c pawn. So once you play c3, I mean, not only am I getting a free pawn, but I'm opening a file, right? So now the attacking chances are really going to start flowing for me here. So I take on d3, and he plays rook d1, which also very interesting choice. I think that in general, we're taught to not trade pieces when we're down material, and he's down 2 pawns here. So rook takes, queen takes, and rook d7, and I just own the open file. Queen f3, and knight g6. So he goes for queen a8 check. So this is why I played knight g6. I wanted to still meet queen a8 with something. Maybe I should be playing something else, like maybe queen d6 is better. Meeting queen a8 with queen d8 or rook d8, but I'm not really sure. I think knight g6 is fine. Knight f8 and then c4. So this is an annoying move. I'm not 100% sure. Like, should I take? Should I not take? I have a great a great center majority, with a passed e pawn, but he's threatening this move 95 or 95, and I spent probably 5 or 10 minutes actually trying to determine whether this move was a problem or not. And I decided that even though it looks really annoying, it's actually not that dangerous. It doesn't really threaten anything. The knight's not going anywhere from e5. It's just controlling some dark squares. And I have so much space that I really don't think that the dark squares, all of these squares here, really matter too much. So I just played f5. I want to play e4. I want to play e3. I want to start jamming my pawns. Knight e5, but e4, rook f4, e3. He decides to sack on e3, which I think is probably a pretty sensible decision. I mean, at this point, black has a completely winning endgame. But it can be a little tricky sometimes with low time on the clock. I think both of us were down below, at least below 10 minutes, maybe below 5 minutes at this point. So we're virtually playing off the increment here. And he was playing very well. He was making tricky queen moves throughout the end game. I wasted a bit of time here, just getting some time back on my clock with some increments, and he takes the rooks off. So I think I actually missed a mate here. Maybe not a mate, but I certainly have something after queen e1. And I just instinctively took the rooks off the board. I think that maybe this is like maybe objectively not the best decision, but I think in practice this makes a lot of sense. Just snap take the rooks off, and I've got an extra knight, right, and a better pawn structure. So I should be winning this pretty easily. Queen e1 though, I mean, I might have something here. A worst case, like now I can take, and I still have the same thing. But I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe there's something else. But anyways, rook takes f3, queen takes, queen e1, and then queen d6. So just want to centralize my queen. And I have a couple plans that I need to keep in mind here. So I need to keep the queen side solid. I don't necessarily need to remove the tension and give myself isolated pawns, but I don't want to make any big slip ups here and give him like some kind of queenside majority. I also don't want to get back ranked, so I want to play h6, but I also don't want to get perpetualed, so I have to keep my queen paying attention to some of these light squares here, and I need to find a way to get my knight active. So it's one of these positions where you look at it and of course black is winning, but exactly how do you win it is not always not always an easy question to answer. So with very little time on my clock, I did a pretty sloppy job of converting this, but I managed to get it anyways. So he just plays queen f4, preventing this fork winning the pawn. And I decided to activate my knights. Again, there's no checks on the back rank. So he reroutes his queen. I play h6. I will preface, since I was so low on time, I did miss a couple of moves on the end game here. So there might have been some tweaking done to this. Maybe I fixed it a little bit, but the general gist of the end game is still correct here. So h6, and he guards the h7 square. Knight f6, just trying to find the right square for this knight. And I wasn't. I guess I made a little mistake here, but I also still think that after he takes, my isolated c pawn is no worse than his double b pawns alone. He can never make anything happen here. I just need to make sure I'm guarding this c pawn. So check, king g2 or king g1. There's a lot of this checks and going back and forth, trying to find a way to trade queens off. Queen b5, queen d4, or queen b4, queen d4, trying to chase this white queen around, and at the same time trying not to allow for a perpetual. Queen c8, another check. I had this knight check, but I didn't see anything after this. For example, I can never check him in here because he jakes my knight, right? So if I come back, then it's just the same thing. He just goes back. So I didn't see anything concrete there. So I went knight g5, and I think that the knight's okay here. But what I really should do is try to get the knight to a square where it can attack these again. I think it was ideal on e4, and I made a poor decision in the moment. So the knight needs to get back somewhere where it can attack g3, and I think you'll see that. You'll see why very shortly. So yeah, so he plays queen f3 here, and I'm eyeballing a very specific swindle here that I'm trying to make work. I guess actually in this position I have I have queen d1. I didn't even see that. Queen d1. This is funny, but it doesn't. It only works if he takes, right? And then I have this fork, but he doesn't have to take. He can come back. So I guess queen d1 doesn't really work. Queen e5, but that's the general gist. I'm trying to find a way to sack my queen and force his king into a square where he can be forked, so I can remove the queens from the board. And once the queens are gone, this should be fairly simple. The knight can remember this isolated c pawn. He just holds down the b file all by himself. So my knight will just need to come over, grab a couple of these guys, and I can even leave the c pawn and use my knight and king to win these two pawns and just run my g or h pawn up the board, and this should be easily winning. So he pins my knights. Queen f5 on pinning, threatening some discoveries, threatening some forks. Goes queen d8, knight f6, and knight h5. So there is no g4, I will say. I played this hoping he would play g4, because g4 is an extremely poor move. It's very weakening, and it's just going to allow me a lot of time on the king, right? I'm going to be able to check to get out of the fork. And once the king is open, this should be much, much, much easier. But when the king has this little kind of mini fortress to hide behind, it's not so easy. Same thing with him. He's not having an easy time attacking my king because I'm keeping my queen on this light square diagonal. This is the key to avoiding perpetual checks in these queen endgames, is finding somewhere to isolate your king and just obstructing this diagonal with your queen. It's impossible now for white to find a perpetual. So he goes king g1. I'm going after one of the b pawns, but again, I'm not really trying to win the b pawn. In a lot of lines, I try to take the b pawn and I get perpetualed, so I have to be very careful. Queen e7, again threatening some checks. I don't want to deal with this by taking the b pawn, so I'll just go back to g5. A lot of these moves are made to gain time on the clock. I will remind. Because we were both kind of scrambling here. I think we actually may have been the last game out of over 60 games in the open section, plus another 100 and something games across other sections. So I think in the entire tournament hall, we were one of, if not the last game playing. And we had a lot of people spectating. So there was a bit of pressure on to clean this up nicely. So I didn't want to run into any problems. But I guess that's the nice thing about this 30-second increment is I can never really lose this position, right? I can maybe make a mistake and throw a perpetual to him, but I'm never really going to lose this. So queen e2, and here we go. Queen e2. This is the magical blunder. So there's a very nice tactic here that you should all know. Try your best to know, when it comes to simplifying or winning material, even, in a position where maybe material was closer to equal, tactics like this do show up in the end game. So very, very quickly here, I just want to expose the fact that the king and the queen are both able to be forced onto squares where the knight can fork them. The queen is already sitting here, and I can play queen c1. Now, he could go king f2. I thought this is actually what he was going to play, unless he saw unless he didn't see the tactic. If he didn't see the tactic, he's going to go king h2 every time. But if he does see the tactic, he'll go king f2. But he just instinctively, without even really looking, played king h2. And now this is completely over. There's no king g3 because of knight g3, and he is absolutely forced to play king takes h1. And then knight g3 wins the queen back with check. And like I said, the b pawn holds everything together. Even if he wants, he can try something like this. But I think that even in the most dire of situations, I should be fairly easily holding on to onto a position like this knight here, and I could just start walking after this. I think, and eventually I'll be able to trade this off. Maybe I'll have to bring my king over this way actually. So maybe instead of this, I bring my king this way. But either way, I should be winning this pawn very fairly easily with the knight and the king, and then his king will be too far out of position to be able to win the 2-on-2 over here. So yeah, that was my game with Ron. It was probably my most memorable game of the event, though I did have some pretty exciting games and some pretty tragic losses. But overall, yeah, it was probably my favorite game of the 9 games I played.
Awesome. Yeah, that was yeah, it's a great game. Now it's my probably my third time going through the whole game. I went through it a couple of times myself, and yeah, just a couple of really neat tactics there. The one to win the pawn in early in the game, and yeah, it was really really great great finish. And love hearing the story about the empty room after all the games are
Yeah,
finished. And I've been in that situation myself where I've got this game that it's just been going on so long because I don't you don't want to mess it up because like you say, there's perpetual checks, there's tricks, there's ways you can stumble into a draw. So yeah, well done to hold on to that under that pressure.
yeah. Thank
And
you.
yeah, that's great. And yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to look at some of your other games.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've got all of them here. So if at any point I'll fire them off to you, and we can have a chat about any of these. At
yeah,
least the ones that are maybe worth sharing.
yeah. Oh, and I wanted to ask you about Laval as a place to go for a vacation, a chess vacation or whatever. What was something outside chess that you could say that was great about Laval?
Well, I will say that most of my non chess time was actually spent in Montreal.
Oh wow.
We were staying in Laval, but we were spending most of our leisure time. We'd get a ride out to downtown Montreal and hang out there for the day, and then get a ride share back. But I mean, we went to an amusement park, which was a lot of fun. Me and some of the other Newfoundland players, and we had lots of really good food. I will say, of all the Canadian cities I've been to, I think I'm at like 12 out of maybe 15 cities, relatively big cities now. Montreal's got the best food,
Oh yeah.
100%. Yeah,
Awesome.
they Montreal food is unbelievable. There's such a great diverse food culture there. So that's really cool to see. Lots of really good like authentic Italian places and smoked meat sandwiches, of course, and poutines and all that stuff. So uh, overall, I would say the food was probably my favorite part, but the atmosphere of downtown Montreal is vibrant. It's very, very, very nice. It's in the nighttime, the streets are lit up and full of people and all that stuff. But in the daytime, it's sunny and 30 degrees, and there's live music being played, on one street corner, and then you go to the next street corner and you've got a record store with more records than every record store in Newfoundland combined. And you go to the next store and there's a full chess store, right? So there's all sorts of stuff around every corner. There's lots of little niche little shops and markets around that are really nice to take advantage of while you're there.
All right, excellent. Well, and hopefully, if any of your students are watching this might be on their list for a future vacation. I would recommend the Canadian Open as a great vacation, solo or family. So,
Yes,
yeah,
100%. I will. I mean, next year, Surrey, BC. We'll see. It's as far as I can, as literally as far as it can be from us
yeah,
in
yeah.
Canada. But um, maybe I'll make it work. We'll see. I had a great time this year, so I'd love to go again if I can.
Yeah, yeah, it is a great time, and doesn't matter what level you are, the Canadian Open will have good quality games for you to play. So it's great
Yeah,
like that as
there's
well.
there's under 2,000, under 1,800, under 1,500, and an open section this year with almost 400 players total,
Yeah,
which is
that's
very, very good. The open
great.
section was impressively strong.
Yeah,
Very, very, very strong.
yeah, I was following it, and yeah, definitely looked like a strong tournament.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
like to give very quick shout out to Zachary Dukic,
Oh,
my coach, who started 0-2. FIDE Master started 0-2, losing to untitled players, and then went 7 out of 7, beating a GM. So
great.
let's go,
Yeah,
Zach. Tied for
yeah.
second.
That's awesome. Double Swiss Gambit. I heard someone
Yeah,
call it.
the old Elo Gambits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone, and like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.